Welcome to the Numerical Tarot, a new tarot paradigm, an alternative to tradition, an axial system of archetypal crystallography, a transculturally anthropomorphized, life-biased binary influence calculator, a wisdom system and archetype enhancer with harmony of interpretation throughout. The content of all the videos in this series are excerpts, edits and brief summaries from the eBooks All Things Are Numbers and All Things Are Patterns, links below. For a more complete explanation of each idea, additional reading might be helpful. Hopefully the basic ideas come across enough to pique your interest in trying this alternative approach to tarot. In the previous video, we discussed archetypes. Archetypes are considered invisible lines of force that shape manifestation. On a mundane level, they help to explain the personality and behavior of humans. We observe these personality types and illustrate them on little pieces of paper called a tarot deck. But, as stated in the previous video, the icons we draw are not the archetype, they just play them on little pieces of paper. As we create icons for a tarot deck, we use the stages of our theoretical model of existence, and all the many other models discussed, to determine the character of each personality. In studying the nature of personality types, many combinations of personality are possible. Each person is a mass of confusing and conflicting thoughts, feelings, and emotions, a hybrid, made from an assortment of fundamental elements. The numerology being presented in this study can help organize this confusion. But, as with drawings, it's not exactly the numbers of numerology that influence. The numbers of numerology are just convenient labels. What influences a personality are the fundamental abstract patterns in nature that the numbers represent. The numerical tarot deck, that is used to illustrate the abstract patterns in nature presented in this study, consists of several smaller decks. Each deck is the same in what it attempts to describe. What is different between each deck is in how, and how much, it describes. The quaternary deck attempts to distill the essence of the basic, abstract, primordial patterns of existence into 4 cards that represent the 4 stages of our theoretical model. The major icons then expand on these 4 fundamental stages of existence and attempt to anthropomorphize the basic, abstract, primordial patterns of existence into 18 human icons. The minor suits then expand things even further, while focusing more on symbols and symbolic representations, with 36 tableaus. Any one of these decks could be used to help describe the personality of a human. But because the minor suits of the numerical tarot deck has twice as many cards as the majors, it can describe more. Both decks describe the same thing, the minor suits just uses more cards. In using more cards, it is able to make subtle distinctions in the variations of personality that the majors cannot. With the dividing of the ameliorate or positive majors into 2 suits, coins, addition and cups, multiplication, and the deteriorate or negative majors into 2 more suits, staves, subtraction and swords, division, the difference between analytical thought and synthetical thought are realized, and described and illustrated. This is an important differentiation, because it reveals a fundamental concept that is important to understanding how people think. Describing the nature of how people think is not the primary goal of the numerical tarot deck, but understanding how people think is important to the understanding of existence, which is the primary goal of this study. And in this goal, the layout and content of the various decks can help. Over the years, many great thinkers have tried to distill the essence of personality types to a select few. For quite a few of them, 4 seem to be enough. For basic types mixed or modified in various ways, produce the seemingly infinite variety of expressions that we see. But, while many of these thinkers agree that there are only 4 types, they often disagree on exactly how to define what those 4 types are. In my opinion, I am inclined to speculate that one of the reasons for the disagreement among authors on personality types might be the fact that, like tarot, each person is grounding their conclusions in personal observation and the frequency of what they see, and not fundamental, abstract patterns in nature that transcend the influence of personal opinion. So, in devising my own personality types, I decided to see if I could come up with a model to describe some basic modes of thinking, using the fundamental, elemental, archetypal patterns seen and used everywhere else in this study, with complete disregard for what I myself may have personally observed in human behavior. Conveniently enough, my quaternary deck describes a model of existence in exactly 4 stages. What luck! But what do those 4 stages represent? The quaternary describes the 4 stages of a model of existence, but as pointed out elsewhere in this study, those 4 stages of development converge upon a 5th central point that all forms of existence logically have. So while the quaternary is a good place to start for a study on modes of thinking, there is one more mode to consider, whose existence is only made evident when a full number line is revealed. So in stark opposition to tradition, I would like to present 5 ways of being or thinking. In the past, I've heard some people compare their 4 personality types to the 4 characters found within the story The Wizard of Oz. I too see many similarities between those 4 main characters and the 4 stages of my theoretical model. But in my case, my additional mode, or 5th way of being, now allows for the inclusion of the wizard himself, or the witch, depending on whether you are examining the positive or negative side of the majors. Here is a chart. I have many in my books. This one breaks down the 5 stages of the model into keywords we can use to describe personality types, and see how they compare to the characters in the movie The Wizard of Oz. In this analogy of form, the scarecrow correlates with the thought part of the 5 mental senses model, while Dorothy, the observer-explorer, equates with the vision part of that same model. The Tin Man's desire to know love then corresponds with the feeling part of that model, while the lion's desire for courage corresponds to the instinct part. When the quaternary is unfolded to create a full number line, we see the wizard, or witch, as the linchpin mode that controls and unites all others. Like chakras in the body. 1-9, the scarecrow represents the thought of a physical brain or metaphysical mind, making him a cerebral type. 2-8, while Dorothy represents the vision of physical eyes or a metaphysical spirit, making her a perceptual type. 3-7, the Tin Man then represents the feeling of physical skin or metaphysical soul, making him a sensorial type. 4-6, while the lion represents the instinct of physical guts or metaphysical heart, making him a visceral type. 5, and the wizard then represents the temper of a physical core or metaphysical essence, making him an elemental type. Given these analogies, modes of thinking would follow as 1-9, the scarecrow's brain would be concerned with what is knowable or not, in either an indicative or intuitive way, making him either an analyst or synthesist. 2-8, Dorothy's eyes would be concerned with what is observable or not, in either an objective or subjective way, making her either an empiricist or speculatist. 3-7, the Tin Man's skin would be concerned with what is touchable or not, in either an actual or virtual way, making him either a realist or idealist. 4-6, the lion's guts would be concerned with what is relatable or not, in either a practical or instinctual way, making him either a pragmatist or a romanticist. 5, and the wizard's core would be concerned with what is describable or not, in either a deductive or inductive way, making him either a rationalist or theorist. There are of course several other models that you could superimpose over this chart to further clarify and further support these conclusions. And you might not like some of the words I've chosen, and think that I am using them incorrectly. But the point of all this is to try and define meaning with words that point to fundamental concepts, rather than a personal perspective with a bias. So, I would encourage you to look further and find those other models elsewhere in this study, and in my books, and check to see if consistency is afoot or not. You might like some of the keywords used there better than the ones being used here, and thereby obtain a better understanding of the essential meaning that is trying to be conveyed here. In the meantime, it would behoove you to observe how the 2 sides of this chart effectively describe the subtle, yet distinct, difference between the suits of the minors of the numerical tarot, being alternately analytical or synthetical, or physical versus mental, or, dare I say it, male Martian versus female Venetian. Personally, I have no problem seeing this relationship within traditional decks like the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and have intentionally included it within the design of my own deck. I think that if you look at each coin or stave card in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, through the eyes of an analyst, empiricist, realist, pragmatist, or rationalist, you may begin to see a bit more. And if you also view each cup or sword card through the eyes of a synthesist, speculatist, idealist, romanticist, or theorist, you may begin to see more. And if you then contrast and compare, you may begin to see a grand pattern within the deck itself. If you don't see it within the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, take a look at the Numerical Tarot deck. As an example of the analytical versus synthetical relationship between suits of the Rider-Waite-Smith kind, I would point to 3-7, the relationship between the actual notion of physically sculpting a building within the Rider-Waite-Smith 3 of coins, versus the virtual notion of love and joy found within the Rider-Waite-Smith 3 of cups, both reducing to the notion of touchability and sensitivity, etc. 2-8, one might also consider the physical motion of the 2 of coins to be more objective, while the notion of balance and equality found within the 2 of cups might be considered more subjective. For 6, one might then consider the practical sense of money found within the 6 of coins, versus the instinctual sense of home and family portrayed within the 6 of cups, both reducing to the notion of what you have, your substance or guts. 3-7. The 7 of coins reveals a physical pause in activity for a realist to contemplate the actual ripening of tomatoes, or whatever those plants are. While the 7 of cups reveals an idealist contemplating the virtual leaps of his imagination. 1-9. The 9 of staves wall of finality suggests an indicative mind at work, while the 9 of swords darkness of night suggests an intuitive mind at work. Other examples may be a bit harder to see, partly because of how inconsistent the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is, in my opinion, and partly because these underlying concepts are so abstract. Here is another chart that says the same thing as the previous one, 5 types of people, across 9 numbers of numerology. On this chart, the scarecrow, living in his brain, nailed to a post in the middle of a cornfield, is a loner. Dorothy, with her eyes following the yellow brick road, is a spectator. The Tin Man, with his heart, is an empathizer. The lion, with his courage, is a participator. And the wizard, with his bag, is an advisor. Together these 5 types create a spectrum of social orientation that reflects the stages of the abstract model of existence put forth within this study. 1-9, loner. 0% social. 2-8, spectator. 33% social. 3-7, empathizer. 66% social. 4-6, participator. 100% social. 5, advisor. Neutral axis around which the social interaction takes place, like the eye of a hurricane. Let's think of these 5 types another way, using an ever-popular sports analogy. Imagine a football stadium full of people and players. 1-9, the loner is completely detached and not even there. 0% social. 2-8, the spectator is somewhat detached and watching with a critical eye. 33% social. 3-7, the empathizer is somewhat involved and watching with a compassionate eye. 66% social. 4-6, the participator is completely involved and totally there, on the field, ready to play. 100% social. 5, the advisor is a neutral referee who stands at the line of scrimmage between the two sides that are about to get re-involved. This pattern is of course the same as the pattern observed within the apart together model, seen elsewhere in this study, and discussed in video 5 where we covered the concept of proxemics. 1-9, apart and separate. 0% social. 2-8, separate but together. 33% social. 3-7, together and connecting. 66% social. 4-6, connecting and intersecting. 100% social. 5, commingling and superimposed. Neutral core. Like I said before, you can spend a lifetime studying personality types and trying to group them into invented categories of your own design. Or you can simply observe the fundamental, elemental, abstract patterns of nature that influence us all, and logically deduce categories that are divinely inspired and just as inescapable. I choose the latter. But of course, our use of words means that even though I base my types on primordial patterns of nature, the words I use to clothe that invisible man are still my own. So in that sense, my categories are just as invented as anyone else's. But I think that by creating these categories out of something other than gathered points of data, from statistics accumulated over years of personal observation, a certain degree of objectivity is achieved. These are my 5 ways of being or modes of thinking. Most people fluctuate between sides, always being a bit of each. And unlike some systems, most are a mixture of more than one. Some, however, are securely locked into one mode or another. The chart of basic personality types just put forth is of course only half the story. While some of the words used in the personality types chart are completely without good or bad bias, a few of them are. So for some words, adjustments are required to see the complete picture. Because some personality types are organizers, and some are known for being hopelessly disorganized. Some types are great empathizers, some are downright cruel. Some have the vision of a developer, some are lost in a fog. Some are as brilliant as an inventor, some are as dumb as a bag of hammers. But whether smart or stupid, the brain and mind are still the focus. Whether visionary or lost in a fog, the eyes and perception are still the focus. So to know the opposite 5 types of this system, you could just add a d or a dis or an anti or an un or a non or some other negating prefix in front of each of the words offered here, and create a whole other chart of bad types. But whether subjectively good or subjectively bad, the 5 basic types of this system remain. 1-9, cerebral. Clever, encyclopedic type, or not. Confused, idiotic. 2-8, perceptual. Poetic, enthusiastic type, or not. prosaic, melancholic. 3-7, sensorial. Sensitive, sympathetic type, or not. Severe, sarcastic. 4-6, visceral. Valorous, charismatic type, or not. Vulnerable, sophistic. And 5, elemental. Eloquent, diplomatic type, or not. Equivocal, anarchistic. If you don't like any of the names on these charts, you could try picking a more abstract name for each type from one of the many keyword charts offered in this study that attempt to describe the fundamental essence of existence with words. Or, you might use one of the words being used to describe the tarot icons of the Numerical Tarot deck. If you do choose to compare these 5 types to other charts and diagrams in this study, take careful notice of the numerous binary subdivisions that make up the matrix of the Numerical Tarot deck. Notice how the spectrum of social involvement just described coincides with the analogies made elsewhere in this study between our model of existence and that of an atom, with negative outsides and positive insides. Or the planetary model, with intangible limits and atmosphere on the outside and tangible surface and mass on the inside. Or the resulting suit arrangement of 4-6, addition. Coins. 3-7, multiplication. Cups. Versus 2-8, subtraction. Staves. 1-9, division. Swords. These analogies, combined with the spectrum of social involvement just described, might hint to the idea that some types may be more devoted to a collective, the positive mass of the model, while some may exhibit more independence, the negative limits of the model. If this design is translated into the perspective of our personality types, it could cause the cooperative attitude of the 1-9 and 2-8 types to be more exclusive, i.e. operating and functioning on their own terms, exclusive of the influence of others, and the cooperative attitude of the 3-7 and 4-6 types to be more inclusive, i.e. operating and functioning on mutually agreed terms, inclusive of the influence of others. Thus, leading to ideas like introversion and extroversion within the parameters of our highly abstract model of existence. Cool. Another pattern that might be helpful to superimpose over this chart would be the geometric and dimensional models. In each of those models, we see yet another binary subdivision of opposites on a matrix that might influence the perspective of each of our types. In this case, we see a pattern of alternation from one number to the next as active steps of progress are separated with passive steps of progress. If this design is translated into the perspective of our personality types, it could cause the 1-9 and 3-7 types to communicate in ways that are less direct, passive, or abstract, and the 2-8 and 4-6 types to communicate in ways that are more direct, active, or absolute. Of course, you don't really need to superimpose all these models to see the resulting pattern. The operations of mathematics that are used as suit signs for the numerical tarot are enough: 2 negatives, division, subtraction; 2 positives, multiplication, addition, each one with a somewhat abstract operation, division, multiplication, each one with a more absolute operation, subtraction, addition. The last general observation I might suggest is to take note of how the spectrum of social involvement just described might influence the frequency or rarity of each type within any sample population. If this system represents the stages of a model of existence with a core that radiates out to its limits, then on a human level, this tapering off from a huge mass to a final limit could mean that some types are of greater quantity than others, i.e. clusters of people socializing versus hermits on the periphery. Elsewhere in this study, I describe a similar tapering effect by defining each stage of existence in terms of levels of comprehensibility to a contemplative mind. Each parameter or sphere of the model represents a limit, beyond which lies a diminishing return of comprehensibility, or an increase in incomprehensibility if moving outward. The 5th stage represents elemental thought that centers around the regulation and control of existence and whether it is under control or out of control. The 4-6 stage represents visceral finite thought, everyday thinking and comprehensibility from the core of our being. The 3-7 stage represents sensorial thought as we contemplate the line between fantasy and reality, between concepts we can grasp or sense, and concepts that lie just beyond our grasp. This is where we encounter the threshold between the positive insides of the model and the negative outsides. The 2-8 stage represents perceptual thought and concepts that seem comprehensible, like maybe space-time, but because of direct associations to things like infinity, elude the grasp of the finite mind. The 1-9 stage represents cerebral thought as we contemplate the limits of existence, beyond which lie concepts, like infinity, which although relatively incomprehensible, can be understood on some level as a containment vessel of existence. And here is where we encounter the threshold between existence and non-existence. 0, beyond existence, and the nothingness that contains it, we encounter paradox, which is so incomprehensible that to even bring it up as a topic of conversation is to dilute and misunderstand its meaning. And while I try to not suggest that any one of these stages is superior to another, sometimes I think they are, at least in some ways. Meaning that in some instances it almost seems as though one form of thought might be more popular than another, simply because of the amount of effort required to master it, the number of people who know it, and the ease with which you can then be understood when using it. While the so-called higher forms of thought, in being harder to achieve, are therefore less pursued and therefore less understood within any sample population. In other words, there is an advantage to following the herd and fitting in. But if one is destined to be one of these other higher thinking types, they face a dilemma. They have to choose between fitting in and being someone they are not, versus cultivating their true self at the expense of not fitting in and being less understood. If our personalities are defined by nature and nurture, it would be no surprise to me to find an abundance of 4-6 personalities out there, and a sparsity of 1-9 types within any sample population. The characteristic tapering effect of all our models would seem to dictate this design. Although, within most cultures, certainly Western cultures, concrete thought seems to dominate over abstract thought, so it's possible that the tapering effect might be foiled, causing 2-8 personalities to be more frequent than 3-7 types. I think that if you were to study the design of this system and its theoretical model of existence, and the ways in which it is theorized to influence life, the universe, and everything, you might begin to see how this distribution of types plays out. If you are a 4-6 type, you may think that the whole world is just like you, because so many actually are. If you are a loner or hermit type, you know that that is not really the case. There are other types. They just don't dominate the landscape, and so are dismissed as anomalies or outliers, which they are. But this system of typing considers them equally valid contributors to the expression of these fundamental parameters of existence. Which is what all of us ultimately do with our lives. If you want to explore ways of using all this personality information in practical ways, my 2 books have many options to offer beyond that of simple tarot readings. There is a method of name numerology that I invented and have used for years with great success. There is also a questionnaire you can use to explore motivations and determine dominant numbers influencing a person. And don't forget the Quintagrams discussed in a much earlier video. And the binary influence calculator and the dream analysis calculator too. I even have plans for making a box for randomizing 6 coins at once for use with Quintagrams. And plans for assembling an icosahedron with numbers in the triangles for an alternative method of randomization. The Numerical Tarot is much more than just another tarot deck. I hope you look deeper. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Hope it all made sense. Links to eBooks, decks and merchandise below. And, if anyone is interested in drawing a deck based on this system of organization, don't hesitate to contact me for a collaboration.